name is Mike Lenzen. I work with Cova, and my team is called Stetson. I guess the thing I do is I'm a tech lead, and I should probably describe that a little bit because I think being a tech lead in Cova is a bit different than being a tech lead in IQ. So we're paired up with business. So kind of the way it's described is you're like two sides of the same coin, right? So you have a tech lead and you've got a business lead. And so I'm paired up with Monica. She's my business lead, and we're kind of structurally at the same level. We're kind of both leads, so we're kind of co-leads of the same team, which means when we're making decisions, we're trying to make decisions that are best for our team, taking inputs kind of from the super circle or the team above us, which is the Cova product team. And we're trying to come to consensus. And there's always a different perspective because I'm looking at things, what we do for, kind of daily support work and places where we need to improve our software or things that really cause a maintenance effort for us. And those really stand out to me as initiatives that I want to work towards. Well, meanwhile, business direction is looking, at things like marketing and selling to clients and retention of customers and new features and all that kind of stuff. And so there's often a conflict between, well, if we do A, we can't do B. And because of this co-lead setup, it's a conversation, and we try and pick the things we want to do that are best, for our team going forward, taking both sides, into consideration. So it's a very much a daily thing of compromising. We try to keep a healthy amount of bickering and realize we are coming at it from different perspectives, and that's good. And at the end of the day, we should hopefully reach some sort of compromise that's the best solution overall, given those two unique perspectives. So I think that's quite different than maybe what we see in the IQ side. Although I don't work there, that's my impression.
This is so interesting, and I think like the primary audience for this is simply just other colleagues throughout IQ Metrics or Ready or whatever, and you just dove right into something that's really interesting about like the way you guys have built. I've heard it called before a healthy tension. Like it doesn't work if one direction is the only way you go or the other direction is. It's like to find these the right solution to the tension points. You say you don't know what IQ Metrics does, but Stetson was there originally. Could you compare it to how the experience was when you guys were still officially part of IQ Metrics? Like what is Cova formalized a bit more?
Yeah, I can describe it a little bit. So before, when I was on Stetson previously, we had a tech lead after some time, and we had a business lead. And there was a period of time where there was no tech lead, and just a business lead. And then we had kind of a period of time with both, but our tech lead really wasn't interested in being a tech lead to a great degree. So he was doing more like team processes and stuff, which meant things were really much business driven. So we kind of had like this business input, and then, from a technical side, we would figure it out and then we would kind of build it. So it was more of a waterfall type approach where we get this kind of business requirements, maybe some mocks or designs, and then we would, break out and whiteboard it as a tech team, kind of solution what we want to do, and then, kind of build it. And it wasn't an iterative process. So I think the one thing that's really changed for us by having this back and forth, like this co-lead idea, is now it's a collaborative discussion. So, we first talked about it before we even accept what we want to do, but the way our team approaches it is kind of the same. It's not like a top-down driven thing. It's just the co-leads kind of set the priorities, with discussion of the team. We have kind of regular meetings where we try and poll what everyone wants to do and what we think is important and present the issues. And so now the process looks like we're thinking about this feature. We're talking to customers. Here are some options we've come up with. What options do you guys have? And as a tech team, we provide input all the way up at that early stage of it. That goes back out to customers again. We get some more feedback, and we start weighing our different options of how to move forward with it. From there, we kind of generate business requirements and mocks and things. So we're kind of back at the stage we were, but we had this development input much earlier. And so once we hit that point, it's still an evolving conversation. We try to keep We try to keep our tickets mostly low on detail, just with kind of the requirements that we know about, not trying to get really into implementation detail. And then we start breaking it up into code and looking at how we can implement it. And often we find that some of the things we thought were easy are actually not easy. Maybe when we start getting into it after a week or 2 weeks of work, you start having better ideas of different ways we could do it. And what we do is we keep a channel running in Slack where we're just kind of continuously posing questions like, I know we said this, but how would this look? Sometimes it's enough to go all the way back out, back to new mocks and back to customers and back to kind of a redesign. So it's this kind of roundabout iterative process, which generally leads to a more efficient kind of design. And because of that constant working kind of back and forth, we've developed this idea of a ubiquitous language, which we try to work towards, which is where when we're discussing things, we try to discuss them like in that shared channel. It would be a kind of what we call business language, which is just like a human neutral language. Like if you're familiar with the thing you're working on, you can participate in the discussion. So we try and keep all the technical details and implementation kind of out of it because it's usually not important when we're deciding what we're building or really the big picture of how we're putting it together. And then in pull requests and in code, we use all the technical details we want, but keeping this language and continuous communication really allows us to move fast. So what we'll do is bring in a new feature, like we're working on one right now where we're doing a different type of tax calculation. We kind of just heard like, okay, this is roughly what they want. What are our options for implementing it? We kind of did a quick roundtable and decided we could just support a different style of tax calculation and annotate some of things in our tax service. So that was great. We got going on it. Immediately into it, we had a bunch of questions that we hadn't thought of, like, well, what about existing integrations? And are we going to turn this on for multiple customers? How are we going to expose it? But we'd already started writing code and already going down a solution. So having a side channel, we could start asking all those questions as they come up and start kind of firming it up as we go, as opposed to doing all the work up front. And so that's kind of our process. It's quite, so I guess I'm just back into what Cova's process is, but compared to the more waterfall approach we had at IQ, I think that summarizes it a little bit.
You are the easiest interview I've ever done because I have questions I want to ask, but then you just answer them. Because I'll try it. Just the question was, uh, through your experience of developing, the years that you've been developing, what does this do well, or what do you find as some of the friction points that you've addressed? But then immediately you say, like, we're so much more fluid at design, we get more efficient at design, we have a ubiquitous language that allows us to interact a lot easier. If you go back to people you worked with 10 years ago, what would you tell them we figured out and we're doing better than we ever, like, I didn't know that dev could be this clean. We're now doing this. Is that a fair question?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, so we still have lots of friction. We could get into that later, but I think things that I've learned that work really well that I would say definitely pass on. Um, I saw this in a video and I honestly can't remember who said it. And so I've been like, not misattributing, I've just been not attributing this quote, but it's not my idea, but I like it. And so I've kind of latched on to this idea that as a developer, the thing you have to do to write code is, step one, you have to understand the current behavior of the system. And that really means reading a lot of code, understanding what it does, like really get a grasp on what it does today. Step two is you have to understand what the desired behavior is. And you got to ask questions, right? Like, what is it you want? It's not if you get just kind of a spec handed down to you with this is what we want to build, this is how we want it to change, you have to actually understand that. And so that's not just reading a spec, it's asking questions, making sure the things that you're interpreting are the things that are being told. And it can be as simple as just a conversation where you paraphrase everything in the ticket and you're like, yep, we're on page. And sometimes you find you're just way off. Like when you're talking about this base price, I'm thinking this, and they're like, no, a base price is this thing. I'm thinking something totally different. So having a conversation is really important. You have to really understand what it is. and know that you understand it because you've talked to somebody, not just because you think you understand it. And so once you know that, you know what you've got, you know what you want, you just have to write code. And writing code at that point, I find almost trivial. It's you know, if you understand what you're doing before you start it, it's actually quite quick and easy because you know where to make the change. You've already done that work. You know what you're changing. You just have to put it in, and it tends to flow very logically from the requirements. So you start getting code that's very direct, like this is what it's supposed to do, and the implementation reads that it does it that way. Where when I used to start before, I would just be like, yeah, I think I understand it from the requirements. I would jump in and start writing code before I really understood the solution and how things are going to fit in. And the output of that would be a little bit more this kind of spaghetti code with stuff bouncing all over the place, not really well organized because I hadn't framed what I was trying to do before I started writing the code. And then you would get these weird, awkward things where you push it out to, you know, testing. The QA maybe has a different read on the requirements. So it doesn't do what it's supposed to. Then you have to go back to the business analyst and get like, which one was it? Was it this interpretation or that interpretation? All that wastes a bunch of time and kind of ends up with a subpar product. We're just talking it all through up front. I guess it sounds like waterfall, but it's not. It's this collaborative thing where code is the last thing I think you should write. So that's the advice that works for me that I've been trying to encourage in everyone I work with, and no one yet has said it's not a good thing.
Oh, that's so good. I mean, just from my broad view of a lot of different places within IQ metrics, the behavior of jumping in and just going versus the early setup, it's just a challenge that maybe it's hard to find the right balance, but if we err, it's quite often that we start jumping in or we start running too quickly. I think you're sharing so maybe some techniques, but also the a culture within your team and the way that you are organized to make sure that you invest that time early in making sure that it's understood, even the common language, but also like how it's going to work. I think this is all, I don't know the words either or who says this stuff, but it's like the functional design methodology where you do a lot of early discussion of it first. That's good.
Yeah,
Can I also I'm pushing us along way too quickly because this could be hours, of course. But um, do you um, do you have anything in the future of challenges or opportunities or like places that you want to grow even further for your team or for yourself?
uh, yeah. I mean, it's been so like my team has been in a state of flux. So with COVID, I don't know. I guess everyone should know that Cova had some budgetary issues, and we actually lost 3 developers. We didn't lose them as in lay them off, but they went back over to the IQ side and are now working on the IQ products. So we've been kind of onboarding new employees as well as, you know, shuffling roles around. So we have some people transitioning from other roles into the development role on my team. That's been a huge challenge. Just we do things different on our team, I guess, like right from the languages we write in. Most of our code is written in F sharp, which we don't have a lot of developers even in our company that know it. So training in the languages has been a challenge. Training in, you know, the complexity of what we've written, because we actually have quite a complex product the way it's designed. Uh, and trying to understand that so you're able to work in it, and that first step of understand what the current state is actually a huge challenge for us because we have a small development team. I don't know the exact count of services, but it's got to be in the range of like 20 or more. Plus, we have corresponding hub apps and stuff. So there's no one around that actually knows what a lot of this stuff is. A lot of it was written 5 years ago and hasn't materially been touched or changed. And grasping how everything interacts in this kind of distributed world is really tough just because of that ratio of how much stuff there is to how few people have to kind of understand and maintain it. So that's been a really huge challenge for us, just onboarding and getting that, you know, understanding of how it behaves in the system, because you can't grasp that from one little, you know, repository of code. You have to really understand a lot of stuff and how it interconnects before you can start seeing that picture, and that takes a lot of time. So that's been a big challenge. I think moving forward, We haven't. I have intentions of kind of re-envisioning how we've done things in the past, and realizing that maybe we've built a complicated solution to a simpler problem, and we can actually start making inroads into making our solution simpler, which will kind of aid with all this onboarding and being able to come up to speed with what you have to know before you can make a change. If the solution itself is just materially simpler, if it still can meet the same business goals, I think that's we have a lot of room there that we can improve, which will kind of help us out towards that goal.
This is so good. Thank you, Mike. Um, I I'm not with these interviews. I'm not doing part twos or sequels yet, but I think the part two or sequel is as a panel with you and maybe Ryan Zenz and some other folks, where we talk about um, the different life stages of a product. Because I think Cova was 5 years ago was this lightweight, just find a solution, kind of thing. And now you're talking about some of the legacy things in it. And it's like I mean, I'm not the guy. I think every technical person sees these stories of how greenfield software becomes uh, um, legacy software, and you have to address stuff. That's a whole nother conversation for a different time, I think. But thank
Yeah,
you for that.
that's the fallacy of rewriting software. You always think it, and it comes down to those three steps. So the step one of understanding what it does can be really hard, and so you say it would just be easier if we rewrote this. But then by the time you've rewritten it, if you didn't understand what it did before and you didn't understand how you could simplify things and make it better, you just end up in the same spot again because you do it the same way you did the first time, and you get back to this, complicated structure. So I think that'd be a good panel to. It's just an interesting thing to talk about. Um, Cova's got a really interesting take too because we started life not as Cova. So I think I wasn't around, but I think way back when it was intended to be an RQ kind of replacement. And so it started life there and was meant to replace a very mature, complicated program like all already. And so it was probably over engineered from where Cova started life and started using it. It was pretty much a lot of it was written, a lot of functionality was there. So we almost started with this kind of overcomplicated system, which if you view it in first, you have to understand what it does. In that light, it could seem like already legacy. So like the day we started, we were like, oh, we have a legacy system because now we're trying to write something for Cova, and we have this product that was already written and quite complicated. Um, but if you compared it to say RQ, you would say, oh man, this is so much simpler and easier. So it wouldn't appear legacy next to that. So yeah, it'd be an interesting panel for sure.
This has been really fun and very informative. So I want to officially thank you for sharing this with me, and of course with anybody who watches it after. This has been really good. Thank you very much, Mike.
Okay, thanks, Simon.
Thanks.